your heart and say the Pledge of Allegiance as you really mean it. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please have your seat.
I'd like to recognize some guests that we have with the convention, Columbus Convention and Visitor Bureau. We had an opportunity to work together. And someone you've seen roaming the halls, always helpful, Emily Newsom, General Manager of the Hampton Inn. David Stieghan and his wife Shantae, Fort Benning Command Historian. We'll be hearing from him later. And Dan Elder, Commanding Sergeant Major retired, who's writing books. At this time, I'd like to call forward Sergeant Stan Silva for the reading of the Infantry Creed.
I am the infantry. I am my country's strength in war, her deterrent in peace. I am the heart of the fight, wherever, whenever. I carry America's faith and honor against her enemies. I am the queen of battle. I am what my country expects me to be, the best trained soldier in the world. In the race for victory, I am swift, determined, courageous, armed with fierceness that will win. Never will I fail my country's trust. Always I fight on through the foe to the objective to triumph over all. If necessary, I will fight to my death. By my steadfast courage, I have won more than 200 years of freedom. I yield not to weakness, hunger, cowardice, or fatigue, to superior odds. For I am mentally tough, physically strong, morally straight. I forsake not my country, my mission, my comrades, my sacred duty. I am relentless. I am always there, now and forever. I am the infantry. Follow me.
Thank you, Stan. At this time, I'd like to call upon Lonnie Rice to give an invocation.
First of all, I hope everybody's having a good time. I know Scott and Tony and their wives and all these other people involved in it have done a great job. So give them a hand. Scott asked me to bless the food tonight. So if you'll bow your heads, please. Our most gracious, our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for this day. And Lord, thank you for allowing us to come here together to share times. And Lord, we know that you enjoy when we enjoy life and make the best out of life. And we ask that you be with each one of us, our families, as we spend time here and reminisce on things that we did in our youth, because we're definitely not youth anymore. Lord, and we ask that you bless the food tonight that we're about to receive and use it to strengthen our bodies to keep us going. And things that we do, bless you. We ask this in Christ's name.
We're having a buffet this evening, and there's a plan how that's going to take place. Jamie, over here in the corner, will guide us. We're going to start with the front row, and we'll go down and around the Medal of Honor display. The buffet's over there, and then we'll come here. So, Jamie, and the table here on right there, and here, and here, and here. Bon appetit. And then depending how long you want, if you want to stand in line, we can just fill there. But I don't stand in lines anymore.
Have some dinner someplace nice and just enjoy it without having to worry about where a bus is or where a meal is and that sort of thing. But we really, really thank you very much for all of your help, and I salute you, and I thank you very much.
Come on, Bob. So I'll take my wife.
Technology, you gotta love it. All right, I'm gonna actually do my talk from here, because I'm sure most of you will actually hear it better. Welcome to Fort Benning.
Thank you.
I know y'all heard that 50 years ago. But I want to welcome you back to Fort Benning. And I also want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of Reunion. I just want to tell you that no, I did not serve in Vietnam. And was not a graduate, a non-commissioned officer candidate, of course. But it's been my pleasure to come to your reunions now for many of the 18 years that I've been here, and had an opportunity to meet with you and also to get information, exchanging information on the time that you spent here at Fort Benning before you went to Vietnam. The pictures that you saw earlier, none of them are mine, they're from you. And there are some of the photographs that people who have sent to me on email or that I've scanned and this type of thing over the years. Those are all pictures of you and your comrades when they were here from 1967 to 72, training at Fort Benning, serving in Vietnam, and in some of the reunions since that time. And what I've been asked to talk to you about is a fairly recent discovery that we've had here at Fort Benning. I'm very sorry to tell you that most all the buildings where you lived and trained are gone, except for a few back behind this building. The ranges are different and this type of thing, but we were very fortunate back last February, by mistake, to rediscover one of the training areas that some of you may remember from the time you were here at training, getting ready for Vietnam. No, that is not Gregory Peck. In the picture there, that is a cadre member here from Fort Benning at the Vietnam Demonstration Village. Now, when you hear Vietnam Demonstration Village here, most of you think of this. You think of the movie The Green Beret with John Wayne, and the fact that much of that was actually filmed here at Fort Benning. That's Eubanks Field, of course, one of the airborne fields. And they also built a Vietnam fire base as part of the film production on Bush Hill. And as soon as they finished with the film, they said, U.S. Army, that's yours. And train on it to your heart's content. It is just about all gone. You know, it was not a full-time, permanent structure by any means, but it has been memorialized, of course, in that film. Remember Dr. Sulu back when he was a captain in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, as well as John Wayne. Now, this is the location of that village at Bush Hill. And everyone assumed that that's where the Vietnam training took place for troops on their way to Vietnam. However, in February, I was contacted and said, we found this racetrack looking thing out by one of the Terry demo range. Can you come and take a look at it? And I was showing some pictures of it. I said, that's something else. And as we found out, this was a very strange object. It looks like, when you look at it on the ground, and Scott, you've been out there, it looks like a racetrack, an oval, at the bottom of a hill. And inside that is barbed wire going around the edge of the oval, as well as a moat that goes all the way around it. And because of the springs that come down off the side of the hill, there is also water in 1/3 of that moat. And Jake No Shoulders lives down there. Jake No Shoulders, of course, is Cottonmouth. You can't really see very much in there if you don't know what you're looking at. But as you get in there closer, you'll notice that there's still telephone poles across the moat as footbridges that still exist going all the way across the moat. This is one of the most fascinating things. This is the original village sign. Now, the Vietnamese paint has worn off over the years, but the village sign still stands and is intact. What you see throughout the village are these posts in the ground. These are telephone poles. And they, of course, have creosote in them. And each one of them has been burned about ½ inch from the outside to the inside from all the fires, forest fires over the years. These were the piers that they built huts on in the demonstration village in 1965. And they still exist. We found that to be very interesting because once you get through the barbed wire and on the trails and you see these, something else appears. Can you see it in the middle? The tunnels are still intact under the village. At this center area where my friend Ed Howard is, Forrest Gump Howard, that's where 3 of these tunnel systems come together in the middle of the demonstration village. Each one of them has 24-inch concrete culverts. You go 12 meters down each one, and there's another smokestack looking opening like this where you could come in and out. Each one of those would have been under a hut, a barn, or something like that, or hidden in some way. There are 3 of those entrances which come in here, and each one of those goes all the way outside of the moat, outside of the village. There are still barbed wire pickets. There's still barbed wire. The bungee stakes have already rotted. All that is gone, as well as all the huts out there. We have located some of the original maps now that we know we're looking for that shows the electrical plants. This village, for example, had conduit underneath the ground with electricity going through it. And while you were getting your classes from the bleachers, they would juice some of the targets, trip flares, explosions, and other things across this. And this map here shows where some of those are. Apparently, there's a mill van underground someplace. It's probably, rusted and rotted, but it's still under there someplace. These holes go every 12 meters along these 3 tunnel complexes. In fact, this demonstration village is built at the bottom of a rather steep hillside. On top of the hillside, they had bleachers for 225 soldiers. One of those tunnels went all the way up the hill to next to the bleachers so that Viet Cong in the black pajamas who's waving at you one moment, a moment later was pulling up the top of a spider hole and firing a blank at you. On top of the hill are a number of these concrete foundations like this. These were for the tin buildings and others where they stored the booby traps and other things at night. They had a number of booby trap lanes there where you could see the types of traps and things like that and tunnel entrances that you might see in Vietnam. Hard to see in this picture, sorry, but in the very center are the rusty upright steel for the bleacher supports. And from here, the Vietnam demonstration village is down to the left, down off of the slope. And what you see on the side there's what looks like a drainage. Not far from that is the opening for that spider hole, the end of the tunnel I was telling you about. Some of the bricks have been knocked over in the very top here. On some of these openings, I said there's a lot of them out there, but they're remarkably good condition. Much of the village looks like this now. These were taken early spring before a lot of the vegetation had come up. What has happened is we've actually had some teams go out there with weed whackers to cut some of that stuff down so we can take a look at it for some of the VIP tours. Upon finding this location, our goal is to find as much information as we can to find out what is this. We want to then preserve it, to keep it from being destroyed, and then interpret it. Some of you may have seen the World War I era trenches that were discovered a year and a half ago here on Dixie Road in Pierce Range. And we found them just in time because we were able to clean out the demonstration trench and build another one next to it so you could see what training at Fort Benning was like from 1920 to 1940. just in time for us to cut the ribbon for the 100th anniversary of Camp Benning last October. In addition to this demonstration village, we discovered that there were 5 objective hamlets, which are right across the road in the valley. Each one of them is a small family-sized set of huts and village, and underneath each one of them has a tunnel complex, which is also intact. It's the same 24-inch concrete culvert and the same 12-meter openings all along there. But all you see on the surface today are those telephone pole hut piers. So for the common soldiers going along here, I hope none of those 18-year-olds on that compass course have ever fallen in one of those. But they have no idea what that is or what that means. Well, now we do. It's an ever-broadening stream. Here are some members of the patrolling committee, the cadre here at Fort Benning in the 1960s. Some of them are village elders, as you can see, and some are truly Viet Cong. They tried to set up the village with a mountain yard hut, a raid hut, various Vietnamese huts to give people an idea of what they may look like, what they would see in Vietnam. Interestingly enough, they also purchased or leased land in 2 or 3 counties around this area so they could have maneuver areas. They would take you out in a deuce and a half and have you patrol over farmers' fields and this type of thing. Here you can see the local VC battalion commander on the left, and on the right, the assistant commandant of the infantry school in 1967. What they would do is show this is the type of thing you'd see in a village, but this is also how the Viet Cong would try to intimidate the population in this type of thing. Now, on the left-hand side, you're not going to read that, but what has happened is Al Sims and other members of this organization and the 101st Airborne, OCS, and the Officer Basic Course that went out there to train from 1965 to 1972 had been providing information and clues as to what type of training took place there. Here's some of Al Sims, who you all know. He's been very helpful in finding not only non-commissioned officer candidate course, but the 101st Airborne. You see, from what I understand, if you went to the airborne course here during that time, on graduation, they would ask, who's going to 101st and who's going to 173rd? Airborne. Okay, go over here. And they would take them out in the truck, and for many enlisted soldiers, this is the only Vietnam training they got before they went over. Of course, non-commissioned officer candidates, and the basic course went through this camp. Until recently, I thought also the Ranger course went out there, and that is not the case. They had their own courses on Cole Range. 2 months ago, a sergeant took me out there and showed me the barbed wire, the 2-man fighting positions, and the booby traps are still on the ground out there. I have 3 of them in my office if you come by to see them. But you see here, this is Rod Green and some of his reminiscences. He remembers not only coming here to Fort Benning to train, but some of the preparation they did here for Vietnam. Some of these photographs are from public affairs albums that I got about 2 years ago. They gave me a box, so I'm looking through trying to figure out what this is. Well, now we know. These are photographs taken, many of which appeared in 6 articles in the Bayonet newspaper from 1965 to 1972. There was training here going on all across post to prepare for Vietnam. And the Ranger course and all the other leadership courses here, some of it took place in the villages, but it took place across Fort Benning. Okay, folks, what's a tipping bucket? Anybody remember? It has something to do with a hole that's punched in the side of a bucket or a container of bamboo with water in it. And once it drains out to a certain point, it gets lighter and lighter, and it tips over another, and it sets off a booby trap. It's a cheap form of time device. And what you see here is an officer basic course, group of lieutenants who are going through that area above the demonstration village. Slowly but surely, we're finding more about this. We've recently rediscovered it, but we depend on you. What you can remember from this, or not only from non-commissioned officer candidate course, but also your Vietnam reunion or veteran group. Those of you in your group who remember coming here, you're a very important asset to us for getting information on how the training took place and what we're finding. What does this mean? And I'll leave you with this picture. I took this picture back in April. This is the command group of the 1st Battalion, 1st Brigade of the SFAB, Security Force Advisor Brigade, brand new style. Basically, it's MAC-V, Military Assistance Vietnam, which is now going to Afghanistan. Their academy, the MATA, is here at Kelly Hill. They went out there to see this, and they were very impressed by the level and type of training that was done for conventional and unconventional warfare for 50 years ago. So this area is still very important for us to get not only the ideas of how training was conducted, but what we call subterranean warfare, tunnels and caves and this type of thing, okay? So your legacy here at Fort Benning is very important, not only for the training that you conducted here, but 2 years after they folded the guide-ons from the non-commissioned officer candidate course in 1972, the United States adopted the non-commissioned officer education system, and the non-commissioned officer academy was born. What are your questions about the Vietnam demonstration village and the objective hamlets? Great, I was perfect. I just answered all of your questions already. Well, if you have an opportunity to see me after we're finished here, or you can drop by my office in Building 4 sometime this week in between things, I would enjoy having an opportunity to speak to you about your training here at the non-commissioned officer course, non-commissioned officer candidate course, and also particularly this newly rediscovered Vietnam village. Thank you.
Scott, I appreciate that. He asked me before I came up here today to put together a little bio. And, I'm always a little reluctant about, shining a light on me or toot my own horn. But one of the things I made sure that I asked Scott to include were the non-commissioned officer training courses that I participated in. You see, I'm working on a book right now. The working title is called The Shake and Bake Diaries. And it's really your book. It's a story of, first off, the Army's program, what led to the creation of what we now know as the NCO candidate course. In 1999, I was working on a project. I was on the staff of the Army's Sergeant Major Academy. And while I was there, I was doing a monograph, one of my first books on the history of the Army's NCO education. Obviously, I'm a young buck. I'm not a graduate of the program. But one of the things that most of us here in this room have in common is, first off, we're soldiers for life, right? Yeah. My name's Elder, and I'm a soldier for life, as you are. You've worn the uniform, and together we've served. The other thing that we have in common is we've worn the stripes of a sergeant. We were squad leaders. I recall working for one of my great leaders, commanding officer, and he told me, he says, Sergeant Major, the most important rank in the Army is the staff sergeant. They run the Army, and squad leaders truly do. It kind of warmed my heart today when I walked in this building, and you see that great statue right out in front, the Follow Me statue, and you read the words on the inscription of the plaque, and that statue is based upon the actions of the squad leader. And I think it's really kind of apropos. I recall looking at many of the graduation books from the classes, at least the ones I've seen in my research, and that's like on page 2 or 3. I think it's like page 3. On almost every book, I think every book I've seen, are a couple of candidates looking up at that statue and what it really represents. So Scott asked me to talk with you for a few minutes about what it is that I'm working on. The project started in 1999 kind of as a side note. There's been a lot of accolades and honors and recognitions, and I want to add a special recognition, if you don't mind. When I first came to my research, I am kind of a nerd. I'm a computer nerd, but I'm also a self-appointed historian. Dave is a professional historian. I'm a novice historian, so I don't do it as a profession. I do it as a hobby. I'm kind of I kind of see myself as a sleuth. I like a good mystery, and this was a mystery that I did not know a lot about. I volunteered at the Army's Non-Commissioned Officer Museum. If you're ever in Fort Bliss, Texas, former NCOs, make sure you stop by, if you're in El Paso, stop by the NCO Museum and take a look more at the history of this storied Non-Commissioned Officer Corps. But this was a mystery to me that I didn't know a lot about, this NCO candidate course. And as I began to search back in about 1998 or so, one of the first things I came upon was this thing called the NCOC locator. Y'all heard of that? Yeah, Bud Russell, huh? Kind of like Bud, I decided to create a website about the Army non-commissioned officer. It was called the NCO website. It began in 1997. And as one of the links to that, on that website, it was kind of like a Yahoo. Yahoo actually became mainstream in 1996, and the NCO website existed in 1997. And this was before Google. We didn't have Siri. We didn't have any of the great tools we have now. And so really what I wanted to do is create a directory for Army NCOs to just make their job a little easier, to point to resources and facts and information. One of the first websites that I found that was actually on the World Wide Web back then was Bud's NCOC locator. And at first it was just kind of a casual link. But as time went on, and I began to get more and more invigorated and fired up about learning about our NCO Corps, that became a destination for me. That became the project that is now the book that I'm working on. I reached out to Bud, and he connected me with about 40 or so of the graduates of the various programs. What you may not know is the NCO candidate course that you attended was a part of a bigger program called the Skill Development Base. That's kind of a funny name. That don't mean a lot to a lot of people. But the SDB was actually the broader program created in 1967 for the Army to help replace the shortage of non-commissioned officers. Obviously, where all things start in the center of the Army universe is right here at Fort Benning, right? If there's a program that's going to happen, it usually starts right here, it seems. But most other branches recognize the value of the NCO candidate course, and soon Fort Knox and Fort Sill and other places created their own NCO schools. The numbers I saw were 26,000 graduates of the infantry NCOC. However, across all of the branches, there were 33,000 graduates. So, Bud, I just want to personally thank you. I know many here thank you. You're the one, I think, that has really been the early, and I know you had a lot of help, but you're the guy who's maintained the website, you've maintained the records, and I know for me personally, you've been the connector to so many of the graduates. It wasn't meant to be a book. It's only because of some things that I've discovered along the way that's driven me to want to tell your story. First off is, I'm a sergeant. just like you. I have no agenda other than to tell the story. I've read some other stories that maybe not be quite as accurate as they could have been. And so for one thing I want to do for you is tell an accurate story. History can be revisited or retold. There's plenty of Monday morning quarterbacks. I've read some manuscripts and stories that weren't always quite accurate. I don't think there was a creator, one person who developed the course, regardless of what you might read. There's nothing in the Army, the Army's not an island. Not one person develops anything on their own, at least is my belief. It's seldom that happens. It's usually through committee or groups of people or shared ideas or thoughts. I've interviewed many people along the way, not just the graduates I've discussed with the First Sergeant Major of the Army. Mel Lervick is here today, the distinguished graduate of Class 1. I've talked with graduates like him and many others. SMA Woolridge, who we can have a conversation about him and his escapades on the side if you'd like, but he was a man of the times. He was there. He was at the Pentagon with the Chief of Staff of the Army when this was created, and he probably has a little bit of insight to the program. But I spent 2 days with him and much discussion about the Army's role in the creation of that class, that first class in the program. I've also had a chance to talk with a couple of distinguished graduates, including the Honorable Tom Ridge, and I know he's connected to this group here as well. And not only have I interviewed him, but he's offered to help write the foreword to the book. I want to share with you a couple of thoughts before I leave of some things that I found out. It's been 20 years since I started my research and my interviews, and I thought it might be fun to share a few things with you. In my interview with Sergeant Major Woolridge, and I mentioned this to a graduate today, and I asked him a question about the program. And I said, Sergeant Major, can you tell me, do you believe that the training that was given to those men was adequate? And he took affront to that word adequate. I'm going to tell you something. I didn't choose my words wisely, and if you know that old soldier, World War II veteran, 2 Silver Stars, quite a fighter himself. He was the 1st Infantry Division Command Sergeant Major when they deployed in, I think it was 65. Yeah, 65. He was with them on their initial deployment. He was an old soldier, he was kind of gruff, and he told it like it was, like you'd expect. And he kind of gave me a lecture about that word. Here's what I read in the Army's official material when they talked about the non-commissioned officer candidate course. They said the program was designed to select the best qualified and the best trained individuals to be infantry, squad, and team leaders. That's what the program was about. And he spent a little time in this lecture explaining some of the problems that the Army had in 1967. Some of the numbers that I've seen said 200 sergeants a week left Vietnam, which means they had to replace that many equally. And so when you kind of think about it, not all were, of course, casualties or wounded or killed in action. Some served successful tours, but as the Army began to increase the requirements of combat power in Vietnam, the need for squad and team leaders was enormous. And though many career soldiers may have at first took offense to the choices that the Army made to create this new instant NCO, as some people call the program. Other terms like shake and bake or whips and chills were used as well. However, I've learned since, and some of you told me in person today and yesterday, that it's kind of a badge of honor. It's a logo, it's a brand, it's something that some people take pride in the fact that they were instants. The Army hardly knows about the program, which is partly another reason why I write the book, is because the program served a very specific need for a time when our Army made a call. And because of that, and because of the resistance to the career regular Army soldiers, it wasn't always, a light was not always shined positively on the program. As a matter of fact, Dave and I have kind of commiserated about the fact that many of the records and the documents and such of the program were probably, piled up in a trash heap and gladly thrown away so the Army could kind of wipe their hands of it and move on to bigger and better things. Some of the other things that I can tell you that I've learned in my research is graduates, those who attended the program, were probably of higher intelligence than the average soldier. And I know that because I look at the criteria that it took to select those who attended. First off is you had to have a score of 100, an infantry score of 100 points before you could be considered. You also had to score a 90 on the general technical score, which was part of the battery of tests that you took during your induction phase. And there was a series of other requirements. You had to display leadership potential. You had to be recommended by your chain of command in either basic combat training or advanced training. So there was a series of requirements that you had to pass through that many of you were not even aware that you were being evaluated to become a potential candidate. Many of the attendees were offered the opportunity to attend Officers Candidate School, OCS, or maybe flight training. However, one of the benefits to the program was there was no increase in your service obligation, and many chose the NCOC route because they didn't have to tack on another year or two to their obligation. So, another thing I can tell you about the program was it wasn't a knee-jerk response to a need. The Army realized as early as 1961 that we would run out of sergeants in the event of a massive mobilization. During the Berlin crisis, the Army had already been studying NCO education, and when we felt like as a nation that we may have to go to war with the Russians, World War III may begin, the Army realized and began to seriously study how would we provide non-commissioned officers should there be a surge requirement. There were some programs that were created as a result of that. There was a leader preparation course that was created in 1964. As part of those studies, the drill sergeant program also came out. Stephen Ailes first was the Assistant Secretary of the Army and later the Secretary of the Army, instituted the Army Drill Sergeant Program, and it was because of some of those studies. And so when the need happened, when the need and the requirement existed for NCOs, it wasn't a brainstorm from one or two individuals. It was through much study and research that had already happened that there was some similar thought that allowed the ideas and the creation of our program. So I want to tell you just a little bit about the book. I've written 4 books and edited a couple of others since. I worked with Dr. Jerry Horton on his Shake and Bake Sergeant. I've worked with a number of authors, including Ernest Fisher, who probably wrote one of the best stories of the Army NCO Corps called Guardians of the Republic. And what I can tell you about the project, first off, is in my experience, there's no money in books. At least not my books, I can tell you that. So I'm not doing this to make a ton of money. As a historian, I really want to tell a story. First off, my title is Shake and Bake Diaries because that, you got to put a name on something, and I'd love to hear from you, the graduates, what you think the right kind of title would be. Am I on track, am I off track, or is that even really a good way to describe really the program and the men who've gone through it? The book will be two parts. Part one will be about the program, what led up to the program, some of the studies that began in 1958, the Berlin crisis, and some of the research, the leader preparation course. I'll talk about those who helped design and develop the program, General Zayas, Mel Zayas, Hank the Gunslinger, Emerson, and of course David Hackworth were all staffers who helped implement the program. But Bill Woolridge, he credited Lieutenant General Jonathan O. Seaman, the 2nd Field Force Commander, 1st Infantry Division Commander, is raising the problem. Him and his Command Sergeant Major William Bainbridge, the 1st CSM of the Army Sergeants Major Academy, and I think the 4th Sergeant Major of the Army. They were the one that brought it to his attention. He brought it to General Johnson, the Chief of Staff of the Army's attention. The Commanding General of the Continental United States Army did not want to institute a program, so it wasn't until 2 weeks before he retired from the Army that the Chief of Staff signed the order creating the NCO candidate course. So the first part of the book will be about that sequence of events. I will end that section with 2 epilogues. One of the epilogues will be about tonight. It'll be about the aftermath of the program, how Bud and many of the volunteers here have connected the graduates of the program, and how the NCOC reunions have continued over these years. And when I first came in on Friday night, I was just a stranger, and I sat at a table. And one of the things, there were many of you all just talking amongst yourselves, many of the veterans I was sitting at a table with 2 who served together and hadn't seen each other in, like 40 years or something, and then they were back together. And I sat with a couple of wives, and you heard from my bio, I was a career soldier. My wife and I were newlyweds, 36 years of marriage. And I spent the first hour speaking with a couple of spouses. And it really kind of hit home to me about, kind of the generational handoff. And I told my wife when I talked to her that evening, and she said, "Yeah, how did it go, Dan?" And I said, "You know what? The one thing that's the glue that's held Army families together are the spouses." And would you indulge me for a minute again to thank the families and the wives and the children of all of our soldiers and men and women? Would you do that with me? I talked with, I think it was your wife, Tony, who knew more about the Army Infantry Center and Museum in Fort Benning than probably I ever will. And I just think about we kind of drag our wives around for these kind of events, and they participate and are a part of it. So one of the epilogues of the first section will be about the NCOC locator and the reunions and the camaraderie that's existed. The second part of the epilogue is really what brought me to the story, which is why I asked Scott to read a couple of parts of my bio. Before Vietnam, the Army Non-Commissioned Officer Corps was almost nothing but a side note. I kind of call it stolen valor. The Army has this terrible habit, and I don't blame them for it actually, to take the best and the brightest of the non-commissioned officer corps, at least up until Vietnam, and commission them and make them Army officers, and all of their legacy and history and accolades in a lot of cases. There's a few, Sergeant York or a couple of others. Many, like the Audie Murphys and those names that go down in history, became commissioned. And so sometimes we as an NCO Corps, you know, we hear a lot about the generals and the colonels, but how many sergeants can you name besides maybe those you served with? And it's not so much for us, because we leave a legacy behind. And to me, the bigger story is, in 1970 at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the Army, realizing the draft would end in 73, kind of said, oh shit, forgive me for that. We're gonna have to deal with an all-volunteer Army. And the way to do that is we have to recruit and retain men, and later women, in 1975, in our Army to sustain this Army. And to do that, they realized they had to professionalize the NCO Corps. And one of the ways they chose to do that was to create a non-commissioned officer education system. So during a lull in training in 1970, the first non-commissioned officer education program was piloted, and then later moved here to Fort Benning and Fort Knox and others. And it began the non-commissioned officer education system, which by and large has been credited for not only rebuilding our Army in the aftermath of Vietnam, but has really put the U.S. Army non-commissioned officer on a pedestal. Nations study our NCO Corps. Nations model and aspire to be like the United States Army non-commissioned officer. They can never, at least not in today's times, duplicate our Army NCO Corps. And we could not have done it. I could not be a product of that NCO education system if it wasn't for the NCO candidate course. If it wasn't for you and the things that you endured in your trials. The Army invested heavily in that program. You were their last chance, I think. The successes we had as an Army was because of the squad leaders. We all know it was a small unit leaders war. And that's really the glue that kept our Army together. And the Army NCO Corps is still the glue. It's recognized as such. As a fellow sergeant, I thank you. I want to tell your story. Section 2 of the book is just a small amount. I can't tell everybody's stories, but I've interviewed about 50 or 60 graduates. I'm going to use parts of their story to tell your story. Help me make it right. If you have ideas or questions, if you want to know anything that I might know about the program, I'll be here for the rest of the evening. I thank you. Congratulations. Welcome home. Thank you.
Right here, and I'd like to read what it says. In recognition and appreciation for your continual dedication and commitment in maintaining the NCOC website, greatly contributing to the success of the NCOC reunion and legacy, through your ongoing efforts, graduates have reconnected, forming an unbreakable brotherhood. Your generosity and selflessness is greatly appreciated by all NCOC graduates you so ably served. Fort Benning, Georgia, 1967-1972. Buttress.